server-side technologies. So we're going to quickly jump back to client-side and talk about AJAX. And this is the way that your browser will talk to the server. So let's talk about what AJAX is. So it stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The key part you need to worry about here is that it's just JavaScript, and you can ignore the XML part. We don't really use that anymore. So in a typical request, your client or the browser will send an HTTP request to the server, and the server sends back a web page. So this is what you've been doing in the workshops. So with an AJAX request, the client, your browser, sends an AJAX request to the server, and instead of sending the web page, the server sends back some data as a JSON object. So I want to talk about what JSON is in a second, but the idea of this approach is that you no longer need a page reload every time you send data to the server. So imagine you had Facebook, and you're trying to comment on someone's post. Well, if you didn't have AJAX here, then every time you commented on someone's post, it has to send data to the server, so then you would need to reload the page, and that kind of sucks, right? That kind of breaks your user experience. So that's what AJAX is for. So what JSON is just JavaScript object notation. And if you've ever seen Python dictionaries, it kind of looks very similar. You have an object called stat, and it has properties mapped to values. So this is kind of like Python's key to value, similar thing. So here we have members mapped to an array, and in the array, each element is an object with two properties, first name and last name, and they're mapped to the first name and last name of staff members, respectively. And you can access these values in the same way. You can use the brackets and then the property name. So we kind of saw that earlier in the workshop, but we kind of glossed over it. So here's kind of a more formal introduction, I guess. Anyway, back to AJAX. So with the AJAX request, we're sending over data as JSON from the client, your browser, to the server, and the server responds with some more data that it computes and stuff. So an AJAX request is very much like a package. There are three parts: the URL, the type, and the content. So the URL is kind of like where it's being sent to, where the request is sent to. So this is the address. So it could be google.com/search or something like that. The type is what kind of request it is. So in the package analogy, it would be is it a letter, or is it a giant box from FedEx or Amazon? So there are different types of requests, and the most important ones that we're going to be talking about are get and post. You typically won't see the other ones very often, so you don't have to worry about them. Between get and post, as we mentioned earlier, get is typically for viewing or retrieving data, while post is for creating or modifying data. There are some other differences between the two, but this is the main thing that you should worry about. Yeah, so back to the parts of the request. The last thing we have is the content, which is just the data as JSON. Yeah, so AJAX is like calling a function on the server. The browser is sending over some data and saying, okay, server, I want you to do something with this data and give me back the result. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to dive into a little bit about how this code works. So we're going to start on the server side because we just finished doing a workshop on that. So if this looks familiar, it should. We set up our endpoint using this router.get, and we specify /search as the address that we're exposing. And then the function at the end is what happens when the server gets a request to this address. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, this get is the type of request it's expecting from the browser. All right, so now quickly jumping over to the client side. So you would use jQuery. jQuery has a bunch of AJAX functions that you can use. So here we're going to be using .ajax. And as I mentioned before in the previous jQuery lecture, $sign stands for jQuery, and AJAX is just the function that jQuery has that makes it easier to send these kinds of requests. So the next part is we're passing in our URL. So this is where we want to send the request to. In this case, we're setting it to /search. We want the type of request to be a GET request. And here's the data that we're sending. And it's an object, the JSON object that we talked about earlier. It maps the class property to web programming as a string. Yeah. So now we have these two other arguments, these two functions, success and error. So success is what happens when the server finishes its computation and sends us back the data. So if I'm the browser and I send some data to the server, and then the server does some stuff and sends me back a response, what do I do with that? And this is what that function is. So it takes in data as a parameter and says, okay, what do I want to do with this data? And you can do a bunch of different things. So one thing that typically happens is you'll probably append some data to the HTML or something like that. In this case, we're just logging it to the console so we can see it. And then this thing is the error callback. So what happens if the server explodes or something goes wrong? What do I do with that? How do I not explode as well? Yeah. Okay, so now if we go back to the server side, we can write some more code about what to do when we receive a GET request. So the way to access the class object here, so how do we access this string? Well, we can use rec.query, and then rec.query is the same thing as this object here that we're sending in this GET request. So we can access it like we would access any JSON object using this bracket notation right here. Yeah. So now I'm going to do a short demo. Okay. So if you were sending a bunch of AJAX requests, it's kind of hard to keep track of. So I'm going to show you a way of how you can sort of monitor them in real time using the Google Chrome Inspector. So first of all, we have this slightly janky website that just multiplies two numbers with the server, which is not entirely necessary, but whatever. Bear with me a little bit. So here we have this server right here, and if I put in two numbers like, I don't know, 4 and 6, then it prints the number that is the product of those two. So what happens when we do this? Well, if we go back to the code, here's my AJAX file, or here's my JavaScript file, and in it, I'm sending an AJAX request. So whenever the button here is clicked, so this .submit corresponds to the button right here, the multiply button. So whenever this button is clicked, we get the data from the page, so we get the variables A and B, and then we send this AJAX request right here. So what it's doing is it's sending it to URLs multiply, it's passing the data, it's specifying that this is a GET request, and then when the server responds with the data, which is the product in this case, it'll populate this answer input with that data. So let's see. Let's take a look at what the server looks like. Here we're creating a new route right here, /multiply. We're getting the two values using rec.query, and we're sort of forcing it to be an integer, because otherwise I think it's like the strings. But we're multiplying them, and then we're sending it back, like this. Okay. Anyone have any questions? Okay, so let's refresh. Okay, so when I send this request, say, you can see in the Chrome Inspector, if I make it larger, okay, so you can see that there's this new thing right. So if we open up the Chrome Inspector and go to the Network tab, you can see that there's a new entry down here, and you can click on it, and this is your request. So inside this tab, you can take a look at everything inside the request you just sent. So for example, there's the request URL, which shows you where you're sending that request to. It also tells you what the method was. In this case, it's GET, and then the status code. 200 is what you want. This means that everything went okay, which is great. You can also look at the data that you sent. So if you scroll all the way down, you can see that, oh, I'm sending value 1 is 15, value 2 is 12. And the last thing you can look at is also the response. So it's sending 180 back. So you can use the Chrome Inspector to verify that your AJAX request is working like you want it to. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions? And if not, we're going to go to a quick, hopefully quick workshop. Yeah. so I'm going to go over the solutions really quickly. If you can't follow along, the solutions are posted right there. So feel free to look at it in your own time. So yeah, let's do the solutions real quick. So first thing is I'm going to clone the repository that we linked to, and that's right here. Okay, it's done. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do when before I get started is I'm going to npm install to make sure I have all the dependencies I need.
Guys, can you play that one a bit just so we can follow the solutions if there are people who are just trying to follow along?
Let's see. Okay, so when I open this, so we have. Let's see. That's AJAX. Okay, so alright. So now if I run npm start, and then I open my web page to localhost 3000. Okay, that's really large. Oh gosh. Yeah, okay, so this is the starting code. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to include jQuery into our client-side index.hps so we can use the AJAX functions. And we just kind of do that right here. So, okay, so up here in the head, we're going to include it like this. And we're going to also include our JavaScript file, which is going to be ajax.js. So we do this by indicating the source is /js/ajax.js. We also have to include the tag. Okay. Cool. All right. So now we'll need to create a client-side JavaScript file. So under the public directory, we'll create a new file named ajax.js. So inside public, create JS, and then inside this one, we'll create a new ajax.js file. Okay, so now we can open it like this, and let's see. All right, so now we create a find fruit route that gets the fruit associated with the username that's passed into the request, and we'll do it in our index.js, which is in our routes. So this is on the server, and we'll just add a new route right here at the bottom. So router.get find fruit function rec res next. Okay. So inside this, first we're going to grab the username that we want. So in this case, the username will be rec.query. Yeah, rec.query.username like this, and then we want to return the fruit associated with that username. So we can just do res.send db at username like this. Okay, and that's what we want. Okay, so now we've written the server-side route that we want. Now we have to send some data to the server from the client. And first we're going to write some HTML so we can like click some buttons and stuff. So I'm just going to take this and copy it into our index.hps file. So index.hps, just at the bottom right here, we're going to add some HTML code. Okay. So save that. Okay, that's done. So now we can restart our app and look at localhost 3000. So, all right. So right here, refresh. Okay, cool. So now we have this extra box right here, which is what we want. All right. So now in our ajax.js file, we're going to add a click handler that just logs click to the console. So first we're going to add a class to the submit button, so that's easier to submit, to select. And we'll just do that right here. So in our index.hps file, we find the submit button, which is right here, which we already added a class find submit. So we can use this to get access to that HTML element. So first we're going to do document.ready, so we make sure that the document is already loaded before we run any code. And then inside here, we'll select the find submit button like this, and then use the click handler like this. And inside this handler, whenever the button is clicked, we can just log clicked like that. Okay, cool. So this is just on the client side. So that means when we go back to our code, or our page right here, and we hit some, we write some stuff here, hit submit. Then if we inspect the element and go to our JavaScript console, you can see there's clicked. Oh, you can ignore that part. Okay. So it logs click, which is what we want. Okay, so right now our client and our server are separate, and we want them to talk to each other with the AJAX request. So the last part of this workshop, part 1, is we want to replace the console.log with the $.ajax. Okay, so that's what we're going to do here. $.ajax, and then like this URL. The URL that we want is /findFruit. That's the same as down here. We want to send a GET request, so type is GET. The data that we want to send is going to be a JavaScript object, and it looks like the username is mapped to go inside here, and we want this input field right here. So we want that value, and it has a class of find. So that's just $.find, and then the value of it. So this is the username. Okay. So now we define the success handler. Oops. So we have some data, and then here let's just console.log that data. Yeah, okay. So what this should do is it should send an AJAX request with the username inside that input field, and then it should log the fruit associated with that username. So let's give that a try and see what happens. So let's just restart the app. Okay, so if we go here, and we type in Monday's name, and then go to our home inspector. Okay, so it logs arm just like we wanted. Now we want to make sure that we update the p HTML element with the class find output with the return message, in this case the fruit. So let's find that part. Okay. So in this HTML element, we want to put the text that we got back. And the way we do that is using this .text. So first we select it using .find -output. And then we add the text using .text. And then we just pass in data like this. Okay, so let's give this a run. Alright, so if we add Monday right here, it adds the text counter. And that's what we want. Okay, so we don't have time to go through part 2, but if you go look at the solutions, it should give you an idea of what you're supposed to do. And if you have any questions, please come to our office hours tonight at 7 p.m. Thanks, everyone.